He believed he was untouchable, and for a long time, he was. Jeffrey Epstein surrounded himself with presidents, princes, billionaires, and celebrities. Even when prosecutors built strong cases, he slipped through. The system kept failing, and Epstein acted like it always would. But that arrogance caught up with him, and it was his downfall. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're unpacking how authorities actually caught Jeffrey Epstein. After landing a prime teaching job at a school for New York's elite, despite having no qualifications, Jeffrey Epstein was suddenly catapulted into Wall Street finance. How Epstein rose so quickly with so little experience is still a mystery. Maybe that's why he kept out of the spotlight. One of his notable public appearances was in the July 1980 issue of Cosmopolitan magazine, when he was featured as the Bachelorette of the Month. In it, Epstein claimed that he was looking for a cute Texas girl, the profile photo making him look sleek as he lay back on a sofa. This was the same man who just a few years earlier as a teacher spent time at student parties. Even then, it was clear he preferred the company of women much younger than himself. The Cosmopolitan story said the 27-year-old was an options trader at the investment banking company Bear Stearns. He was a New York dynamo and financial strategist who would usually only talk to people who made over $1 million a year. He was clearly obsessed with wealth and image, possibly a real-life American psycho. But in those early days, he was admired by people who lived by the mantra, "greed is good." As Epstein climbed the ladder to success, he stayed away from publicity, but the British tabloids caught up with him in 1992. The Mail on Sunday ran a story about Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of the disgraced media tycoon Robert. She had recently moved to New York City and was said to be building a respectability which would be impossible in London thanks to her father's wrongdoing. She was apparently now smitten with Epstein, who was described as a shadowy maverick New York property developer who might also be a maths teacher, corporate treasure hunter, stockbroker, merchant banker, or globe-trotting businessman. This was one of the first times journalists questioned the mysterious aura surrounding Epstein. No one really knew who he was. But one thing was obvious: he and Ghislaine had become inseparable. Did she know what he was? According to Epstein's previous girlfriend, he never talked about his past. The journalists did some digging, writing that he had grown up in a poor family, which was more or less true. His dad worked as a groundskeeper and maintenance worker for the New York City Parks Department. The journalists looked into his work at Bear Stearns, writing that the National Association of Security Dealers had no record of him with that company. He was an enigma with an inexhaustible supply of money, but no one knew where it came from. Over time, he had built a fortune worth hundreds of millions, maybe even $1 billion, but not by conventional means. From 1987 to 1989, he worked with Stephen Hoffenberg, who ran one of the largest Ponzi schemes in American history, defrauding investors of $450 million. Hoffenberg, who was sentenced to 20 years, claimed that after his release, Epstein had been his wingman and the architect of the scheme and pivotal to its design. Yet in what would become a familiar story, Epstein wasn't implicated in any criminal activity. As the years went by, his job title remained vague. He called himself a fixer and a financial bounty hunter. Through his management firm J. Epstein & Co., he claimed to handle the assets of the global elite. Surrounded by young, attractive assistants, he bragged that he only worked with clients with more than $1 billion. His clients included Saudi tycoon Adnan Khashoggi, the billionaire arms dealer with close ties to both American and Israeli intelligence. Nicknamed the Great Gatsby of the Middle East, Khashoggi was famed for staging extravagant parties attended by the world's rich and powerful. Whatever Epstein did, it was obvious he worked in very gray areas. He traveled on a forged Austrian passport. His place of residence stated as Saudi Arabia. Using a forged document didn't just take shady connections, it showed how willing he was to skirt the law, just like his girlfriend's father. Ghislaine's father, Robert, had been a controversial media tycoon with political and intelligence ties. After his death in 1991, Ghislaine rebuilt her life in New York high society. Her name opened doors, and Epstein walked through them. After Robert died, a death Ghislaine believed was murder. She stayed in New York, and within a year, Epstein's servants believed that she was Jeffrey's main girlfriend. Epstein was by then already incredibly wealthy, yet his financial transactions left no footprints. He regarded himself as a trading genius, yet to this day there is no evidence of where that genius was applied. His most notable client was the billionaire Leslie Wexner, the L Brand's Victoria's Secret owner. Long before Wexner admitted Epstein had misappropriated vast sums of money from me and my family, he had described him as a most loyal friend. He had not only given him power of attorney over all of his finances, but had made him a trustee of the Wexner Foundation, a philanthropic organization that had Epstein on the board from 1992 to 2007. All this despite Epstein having no qualifications, and Wexner kept him on after Epstein had brushed up against the law for crimes that he would later become infamous for. More on that soon. Epstein got his New York mansion directly from Wexner, paying nothing for it, even though Wexner had bought it for $13 million and spent millions more on renovations. Reports also say Wexner passed on other major assets to Epstein, including access to a private plane and involvement with a luxury estate in Ohio. Epstein collected powerful friends like they were baseball cards. But the question is, did they know about his illegal activity or even partake in it? In the late 80s, Epstein struck up a friendship with Donald Trump. Flight logs show Trump flew with him several times, and cameras caught them at the Mar-a-Lago party in 1992. But his real prize was Bill Clinton. Epstein gave to White House projects, attended receptions, and visited multiple times in the 90s. Later flight logs show Clinton on Epstein's jet for foundation trips. Even as the rumors spread, Epstein mingled with America's most powerful. Soon his circle spanned politics, business, and culture. Presidents, royals, billionaires, scientists, even top intellectuals. It seems that outside of the victims, a few select insiders knew the truth about Epstein long before the headlines. It wasn't exactly a secret. In 2015, shortly after new accusations surfaced, ABC host Amy Robach was caught on a hot mic saying that she had the Epstein story 3 years earlier. She also said that she had corroborating evidence, like photographs, but ABC refused to run with it. Editors told her no one knows who Epstein is, so it was a non-story. Soon the public began to learn that Epstein's circle read like a roll call of elites. He met several times with Bill Gates and regularly received important visitors such as Ehud Barak, who would later serve as Israel's prime minister. Photographs in his New York house also showed his meetings with the Pope John Paul II, British billionaire Richard Branson, U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, and even public intellectuals such as Noam Chomsky. He'd also once briefly met Elon Musk and his former wife at his Manhattan house, with Musk later saying, "He tried repeatedly to get me to visit his island. I declined." This boy from a working-class family in Brooklyn had assembled an extraordinary network. He used philanthropy, parties, and displays of proximity to power as a veneer of respectability that helped to mask the darker reality beneath. But soon that mask would slip. In 1997, 27-year-old model Alicia Arden went to the police saying Epstein, posing as a Victoria's Secret talent scout, had manhandled her. Epstein was definitely not a talent scout. Agencies acted as in-betweens, not one man, and certainly not in hotel rooms. Yet Epstein played the role, with Arden later saying his weapons were his hands. She reported it to the Santa Monica police. It seemed the police believed it was a he said, she said scenario. In 2002, New York Magazine ran a profile titled Jeffrey Epstein, International Money Man of Mystery, portraying him as a sort of Wizard of Oz, a man of vast means about whom surprisingly little was known. He was a working-class kid turned enthusiastic member of the Trilateral Commission alongside global elites. Shockingly, for 15 years until 2009, he hung among the U.S.'s most influential people, the highest of high society. He was a part of the Council on Foreign Relations, a group the Washington Post once called the nearest thing we have to a ruling establishment in the United States. Its members included former presidents, banking families, media moguls, intelligence bosses, diplomats, and industrialists, some of the most powerful Americans in history. Epstein was also a donor to Harvard and a former trustee at Rockefeller University. New York Magazine also hinted at Epstein's interest in young women, noting that at his Manhattan mansion you could run into anyone from a Russian model to a British prince. That piece added that Vanity Fair was working on a longer, mega profile. In 2003, that profile, The Talented Mr. Epstein, was published. It took readers inside Epstein's Manhattan house, men in white gloves serving tea, walls lined with nude paintings, and a copy of the Marquis de Sade's The Misfortunes of Virtue left on a desk, a book about a young woman exploited by powerful men. All the signs were there. Beyond the wealth and eccentricity, something darker existed. In the piece, writer Vicky Ward described Epstein as, quote, known about town as a man who loves women, lots of them, mostly young. But she admitted she knew far more than she put in print. During her research, she'd been put in touch with 3 of his victims who were willing to go on the record. According to Ward, When Epstein got wind of this, he lost his mind. He told her in no uncertain terms, "If there is any implication of wrongdoing, I will take legal action against you personally. I will be harsh." When that didn't work, Epstein showed up at Vanity Fair's office and spoke with the editor. Whatever was said was enough. Ward was later called into the office and informed that the witness statements had to go. One of her sources was Maria Farmer and her younger sister Annie. Back in 1996, 26-year-old Maria had been sent by Epstein to Wexner's mansion in Ohio. Like with so many of the victims, Ghislaine and Epstein had promised her what she wanted, in this case a leg up in the art world. After Epstein visited her room, she understood what she had gotten into. She said that she tried to escape and call the police, only to be stopped by Wexner's staff and forced into a locked room. Of course, this got back to Wexner himself. Farmer kept quiet about the incident, but it wouldn't stay secret forever. Epstein also offered to help Annie with her studies by sending her to Vietnam and Thailand, trips that sounded exotic and expensive for someone so young and inexperienced. Soon, Annie was meeting with Epstein and Maxwell at one of his properties in New Mexico. She was surprised when she realized the meeting was between just the three of them. When Maria returned to New York, she called Annie, who was traveling in Thailand and Vietnam as promised. Annie didn't share many details about what had happened in New Mexico. As the older sister who had made the introduction, Maria felt responsible. When she called the NYPD, they told her take it to the FBI. She told the agents everything. She believed she would receive help, but that was the last she had heard from the FBI for a long time. And Epstein? He'd kept on hanging out with politicians and remained on the Council on Foreign Relations. Vicky Ward took their accusations to Epstein for comment. He dismissed them, claiming the girls were immature, infatuated with him, and seeking revenge when he refused to give them what they wanted. Epstein told her point blank that any mention of the Farmers and her life would be made very difficult. Back then, no one knew how big the case would become. Epstein's crimes had reached beyond America, into the Caribbean, and eventually the wider world. But it was Florida where his impunity finally collapsed. His Palm Beach mansion, bought in 1990 and worth millions, sat on a stretch sometimes nicknamed Billionaire's Row. Close by, Epstein kept private planes and a helicopter used to reach his private island, Little St. James. Like his New York residence, the Palm Beach house was described as opulent and oddly themed. Paintings of naked women, including one of Ghislaine, hung on the walls. Former staff and investigators would later allege the property had been fitted with surveillance devices. Epstein had been on the Palm Beach police's radar for years. He made donations to local officials, $50,000 to the Palm Beach Police Scholarship Fund, and later $36,000 to the town of Palm Beach. He then donated $90,000 to the Palm Beach Police Department, not long before he became under investigation. The money was later returned. In 2003, Palm Beach Police Chief Michael Ryder received reports from neighbors that many young women were coming and going from the property. Detectives in Palm Beach's Special Investigations Unit, led by Detective Joseph Riccari, gave it their full attention. At first, the case moved slowly, but in 2005, a mother called the station saying her stepdaughter had been paid to work at Epstein's house. According to the complaint, the teenager had been initially hired to provide massages and then allegedly encouraged into other things for larger payments, about $300 each time. For the first time, Epstein, then in his early 50s, faced a formal investigation into a pattern of alleged manipulation and abuse dating back years. Detective Riccari spent months interviewing other girls. Many said the same thing. A friend had told them they could earn some money by visiting a rich man. Sometimes a woman, Maxwell, approached them when they were walking down the street, but usually the girls recruited other girls, like a pyramid scheme. There were dozens in total. Many of them came from broken families. Epstein and Maxwell picked carefully girls with behavior issues, drug or alcohol histories, even those abandoned or semi-homeless. The detectives believed they had enough evidence to put Jeffrey Epstein away for a long time, at least in a functioning justice system, that is. Getting from evidence to indictment proved far harder than it first seemed. Palm Beach investigators reported that Epstein's staff either refused to cooperate or claimed ignorance. But a review of Epstein's trash turned up disturbing evidence: a high school transcript, school records, and a handwritten note ordering flowers for a student. Police then obtained and executed a search warrant on the mansion. Detectives described the house as shockingly sexualized, what one investigator called the dwelling of a first-class pervert. At the same time, investigators found that key video and computer equipment, hard drives, recording gear, and more was missing. Tables and wires remained, but the machines were gone. Former staff later said the equipment had been removed before the search. Chief Reiter called it disappointing that Epstein had been able to clear the house out, but he still believed there was enough evidence to send Epstein to prison for a long time. The victims' accounts matched the descriptions of the house and the routines. It wouldn't be hard to prove that many of them had been to the mansion, in some cases repeatedly. Memos and notes also linked straight back to victims and to women who, in some cases, acted as recruiters. But as detectives tried to put the case together, they kept hitting brick walls and met what they called resistance, sometimes from law enforcement. And not all of the victims were willing to testify. Some seemed trapped in a kind of Stockholm syndrome, professing love for Epstein or even imagining marriage. Others simply wanted to move on rather than relive the trauma. One was Virginia Giuffre, who after time in foster care in Florida, ended up working at the Mar-a-Lago Club. That was where she said she had met Ghislaine, who promised to train her as a masseuse, but instead groomed and trafficked her among Epstein's wealthy associates. She traveled on Epstein's planes to New York, New Mexico, Florida, and his private island. Among the guests, she said, was Prince Andrew, who later told the BBC he couldn't explain the photo of him with his arm around Giuffre's waist. Giuffre named many alleged abusers. Powerful men she said she tried to leave behind after Epstein sent her to Chiang Mai, Thailand to study massage. There, she met her future husband, later moving to Australia, marrying and having children. But her past never stopped catching up with her. When Palm Beach detectives built their case, Giuffre's name surfaced. One witness claimed that she had recruited her. Maxwell then called to ask what she had said, followed by Epstein himself, but only after law enforcement had reached out. It was as though Epstein and Maxwell were trying to tie up loose ends. Giuffre was a major witness. Unlike many of the other girls, she had spent a lot of time around Epstein and Maxwell. She had traveled with them to various destinations over 2 years. When Reiter first brought the case to Palm Beach State Attorney Barry Kirshner, Kirshner said Epstein would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. But as the Palm Beach Post later reported, Kirshner instead joined hands with Epstein's defense team and undermined federal prosecutors' efforts. Soon the victims were being made out to be young prostitutes, drug addicts, and petty criminals. They were being treated like the guilty party, not vulnerable and abused women. As the case went on, Epstein's dream team of lawyers put Reiter and Detective Riccari under surveillance, going as far as to hire private investigators to go through their trash. They followed the witnesses and staked out houses, and then Kirshner suddenly changed his mind. The case against Epstein wasn't so strong. In 2006, Epstein was charged with just one count of solicitation of prostitution, a very minor charge in view of what he had actually done. He had spent one night in the county jail and was released the next day on $3,000 bond. That was when Reiter turned the case over to the FBI. He later called what happened the worst failure of the criminal justice system in modern history. The FBI revisited Maria Farmer's 1996 complaint. By then, she and Annie had tried to move on. Maria left town after Ghislaine called her again and again, saying that she would fail as an artist, warning her runs weren't safe, and hinting at, quote, accidents. Maria said the threats started only after she spoke to journalist Vicky Ward. In November 2006, Maria, then living in the mountains of North Carolina under a new name, had 2 FBI agents knock on her door. A detective told her, "Don't worry, this time we're gonna get him." She was safe, she could talk. After Maria and Annie recounted their stories again, they were convinced Epstein and Ghislaine were finally going down. Detectives informed them they were not the only victims. There were many, many others. As the FBI investigated, many of those victims filed separate civil claims seeking compensation. Meanwhile, Epstein's legal team escalated its tactics, staking out the civil prosecutor and again surveilling victims, at times reportedly with operatives posing as police officers. The FBI was soon working with dozens of victims who said that they were willing to testify. Some accounts referenced roughly 35 to 40 potential witnesses, and prosecutors prepared extensive charging papers. By 2007, prosecutors had drafted a 53-page indictment alleging that Epstein had trafficked girls across state lines. Then, everything changed. Out of nowhere, Epstein went from possible life imprisonment to receiving what many critics called the sweetest plea deal in American history. U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta met with Epstein's lawyer Jay Lefkowitz at a West Palm Beach hotel. Within months, a non-prosecution agreement was in place. The FBI investigation was effectively shut down, and Epstein was granted immunity from federal prosecution, a deal that usually extended to any potential co-conspirators. None were publicly named, leaving victims and investigators furious and the wider network untouched. Epstein served just 13 months of an 18-month sentence in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Stockade. His cell door was reportedly left unlocked, and he had much more freedom than a normal inmate. Soon he was on work release up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Deputies assigned to him were said to wear suits and refer to him as the client, not the inmate. He paid the sheriff's office roughly $128,000 for personal security while he worked at a non-profit office he had created. And office deputies helped him scout. Epstein clearly believed he was untouchable. Critics and reporters later argued that the missing surveillance tapes mattered. Epstein's properties were rumored to be filled with CCTV cameras. One former employee described a computer room in the New York townhouse where videos from bathrooms and bedrooms were fed and stored. A New York Times reporter also recalled an off-the-record comment that Epstein had collected dirt on influential people. One book, taken from Epstein's Palm Beach butler Alfredo Rodriguez, reportedly contained over 1,500 names, 5,000 phone numbers, and thousands of emails and addresses. Royalty, politicians, lawyers, leading scientists, celebrities, and global oligarchs. Epstein returned to his life of luxury, again hosting dinners and salons at his Manhattan townhouse with prominent academics, scientists, and elites. He now cultivated an image as a philanthropic patron of science, donating to institutions such as Harvard and MIT's Media Lab. He hired PR people to polish his reputation. Clinton and Trump no longer appeared publicly with him, but other high flyers did. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates met with Epstein on several occasions. Prince Andrew was famously photographed with Epstein in 2010, walking through Central Park. Andrew would tell the BBC it was to break up with Epstein, saying doing it to his face was the honorable and right thing to do. Andrew agreed in hindsight that meeting his predatory friend might have been a mistake. Epstein still met with Ehud Barak, and Les Wexner did not cut ties for several years despite the growing scandal. He remained on the Council on Foreign Relations until 2009. The civil lawsuits did not go away either. There were roughly a dozen suits, some settled out of court. Epstein settled with Virginia Giuffre in 2009 for about $500,000. Her separate claims against Prince Andrew was not settled until 2022 for an undisclosed sum of money. Media reports estimated figures in the millions. In 2011, 2 of Epstein's victims sued in federal court, accusing prosecutors of hiding the earlier plea deal and violating their rights. They claimed they had been misled by false notification letters and sought to void the deal. Later that year, Epstein was required to register in New York as a high-risk sex offender, a designation that stuck despite his energetic efforts to oppose it. Around that same time, his PR campaign accelerated. He began funding cancer research, science initiatives, and high-profile conferences on global platforms. Philanthropy became his cloak, his powerful friends his shield. But on July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested after his private jet landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He was charged with trafficking dozens of minors in New York and Florida between 2002 and 2005 and was due in a New York courtroom 2 days later. This time, prosecutors couldn't be blocked by his old plea deal. In a joint FBI-NYPD action, agents smashed down the front door of his Manhattan townhouse with a sledgehammer. Investigators uncovered thousands of lurid images and videos, but what the tapes and hard drives held is still a mystery. If the townhouse was wired throughout, no one knows if Epstein used that footage to blackmail or just kept it hidden. More dirt started to come out as Epstein languished in a jail cell, apparently confident he would not spend his life in prison. It was becoming the crime of the century, far bigger than a regular trafficking case. How had Epstein made his fortune? How had he made such powerful friends? Was a financier somehow working with intelligence-linked arms dealers? The deeper people dug, the murkier the picture became. No reasonable explanation has ever been offered for how he secured his sweetheart deal. The Justice Department launched reviews into how the earlier case had been handled. Officials would later conclude Alexander Acosta had exercised poor judgment in approving the secret non-prosecution agreement. The finding convinced almost no one. Most believed it was a clear miscarriage of justice. Still, there were many witnesses, some who had said they had met Epstein hundreds of times and who were willing to name names. Epstein's fortified world was about to come tumbling down, and it was looking like a lot of people could possibly go down with him. As everyone waited with bated breath, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell on August 10, 2019. 2 cameras outside of his cell were not working properly that night. The 2 guards assigned to check on him fell asleep and later falsified logs to show that they had done the required checks. This was the most high-profile prisoner in the USA, connected to wealth and power. It didn't make sense. A pathologist hired by Epstein's lawyers, Dr. Michael Baden, one of the country's most respected, later said his review found multiple neck fractures, including a broken hyoid bone, injuries he described as more consistent with homicidal strangulation. Later, the Justice Department would release the prison CCTV tapes, but despite the Department of Justice's claim that the footage was the full, raw package, analysis showed it was stitched together. For critics, the footage that exists by no means proves the official story is true. Some former intelligence officials and journalists believe Epstein ran a honey trap, gathering dirt on powerful people. There's no hard proof, but they argue the circumstantial evidence is enough to demand investigation. And questions still remain about his fortune. Eric Weinstein of Thiel Capital met Epstein and later said his financier image was a cover story. After talking with him, Weinstein concluded he certainly was not a financier in any standard sense. If tapes of wrongdoing exist, some observers warn, they would be politically explosive, not for the left or for the right, but for the whole institution of government. Those theories remain speculative. They have not been proven. But there is still a whole lot missing from the story of Jeffrey Epstein. You've seen how Epstein was caught, but the bigger mystery is what happened next. Watch what really happened to Jeffrey Epstein to uncover the truth behind his fate, or click on this video instead.